Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 40 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3. And today we are going to begin chapter 14, which is titled Pregnancy of Deity in the Evening. Let us begin by chanting our prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschyatyade Shatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakapatarubhyascha kripa sindubhya evacha, Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay, devotees, so here we go. Day 40 of the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, beginning chapter 14 of the third canto, titled Pregnancy of Deity in the Evening. Right, okay. So there are 51 verses in this chapter, 51, and we've divided them into 7 sections as follows. Verse 1 to verse 4, Vidura inquires further about Varaha. There just was discussion about Lord Varaha just a little while ago. The appearance of Lord Varaha. So, from verse 1 to verse 4, Vidura inquires further about Varaha. And now, this whole subject, pregnancy of deity in the evening, this is all about the appearance of Hiranyaksha, who we just read got killed by Lord Varaha, Hiranyaksha, and Hiranyakashipu, who later on was killed by Lord Nrsingadev. So this chapter then is dealing particularly with the story of how Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu appeared in this world. Yeah, and then they were just shortly, not so long after, they were killed. Okay, so that was the first section, verse 1 to verse 4. Vidura inquires further about Varaha. Then second section, verse 5 to verse 15. Deity asks Kashyapa for a child at an improper time. Wrong time. Wrong time for conception, you get the wrong child. So from verse 5 to verse 15, Deity asks Kashyapa for a child at an improper time. Then third section, from verse 16 to verse 32, Kashyapa agrees to conceive a child with Deity despite the inauspicious time. That's a bit long title for the section, but that's the basic idea though. Verse 16 to verse 32, third section, Kashyapa agrees to conceive a child with Deity despite the inauspicious time. Then fourth section, verse 33 to verse 36, Diti expresses remorse because she was so anxious and pushing her husband so hard that I must have a child. And it didn't matter if the circumstances, the time was auspicious or not, which of course would determine or play an important part in determining the quality, the character of the child or children who would come. So now from verse 33 to verse 36, the fourth section, Diti understanding that bad children are going to come and they're going to cause me a lot of suffering. So the section we have titled Diti expresses remorse. Then the fifth section, verse 37 to verse 41, Kashyapa explains what will happen to her children, how they're going to cause a lot of chaos and be killed by the Lord. Verse 37 to verse 41, Kashyapa explains what will happen to her children. And the sixth section, it's just verses 42 and 43, just the two verses together. Diti is happy that they will be killed by the Lord. 42 to 43, Diti is happy the children will be killed by the Lord. And then the seventh and last section, verse 44 to verse 51, Kashyapa tells about her grandson, Prahlad, who's going to be a great devotee. So after, quite a bit of negativity and inauspiciousness through the course of the chapter, but right at the end, great auspiciousness, verse 44 to verse 51, Kashyapa tells about her grandson Prahlad. Okay, devotees, so here we go. First section, verse 1 to verse 4, Vidura inquires further about Varaha, because Varaha, of course, is very closely, inextricably connected with particularly Hiranyaksha, but also Hiranyakashipu. Both of these people, these demons, who become the children of Diti. The Daitya demons means the demons coming from Diti, the Daityas. So it's just 4 verses, and I can see the first one doesn't have a purport, so I'm just going to read straight through verses and purports. Verse 1 to verse 4, Vidura inquires further about Varaha. Verse 1, Shukadev Goswami said, after hearing from the great sage Maitreya about the Lord's incarnation as Varaha, Vidura, who had taken a vow, begged him with folded hands to please narrate further transcendental activities of the Lord, means Lord Varaha, since he, Vidura, did not yet feel satisfied. So, verse 2, Sri Vidura said, O chief amongst the great sages, I have heard by disciplic succession that Hiranyaksha, the original demon, was slain by the same form of sacrifices the personality of Godhead, Lord, bore. So there's a short purport here to verse 2. And Prabhupada mentions how he has in the previous chapter or so, explained on the basis of explanations from our acharyas, particularly Jiva Goswami, also Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, that Varaha, the boar incarnation, appeared in 2 millenniums, the Swayambhuva millennium and Chakshusha millennium. In both millenniums, there was a boar incarnation of the Lord, Varaha. But in the Swayambhuva millennium, that was when he lifted the earth from the water. And in the Chakshusha millennium, he killed Hiranyaksha, the first demon. How's that? That's interesting, isn't it? Worth noting. In the Swayambhuva millennium, Lord Varaha lifted the earth from within the water, if you remember. It had become submerged. So Lord Varaha lifted the earth planet out from within the water and placed it on the water, where it floated nicely for the time being. And that was it. Then we read, actually, then Lord Varaha returned to his abode. And that was the end of that for the time being. But in the Chakshusha millennium, then he encountered Hiranyaksha, the first demon. Lord Varaha encountered him, and he killed Hiranyaksha. And another interesting and important point, in the Swayambhuva millennium, Lord Varaha was white in color. In the Chakshusha millennium, he assumed the color red. Now, this is interesting, isn't it? So the thing is that Vidura had already heard about the white form who had come and who had saved the earth, but now he wanted to hear about the other one. Yes. So therefore here in verse 2, he makes that point. Not just the earth planet was saved, and that was the end of it, but he's also heard that Lord Varaha killed Hiranyaksha. So he wants to know more about that. That these, he'd already heard about one of them, he wanted to hear about the other, but the fact is, the 2 different boar incarnations described are the one Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, anyway, the narration continues, verse 3. Vidura asks, "What was the reason, O Brahman, for the fight between the demon king and Lord Boar, while the Lord was lifting the earth as his pastime?" So, anyway, he's bringing in the saving the earth pastime also at the same time. But there's no purport here to verse 3. Let's read verse 4. "My mind has become very inquisitive, and therefore I'm not satisfied with hearing the narration of the Lord's appearance. Please therefore speak more and more to a devotee who is faithful." Right. So there's a very short purport, but it's very nice. Prabhupada makes the point that a person who is actually faithful and inquisitive is thereby qualified to hear the pastimes of the appearance and disappearance of the Lord. You know, generally, and by far in the majority, we hear of the appearance and pastimes. The disappearance, well, we heard actually not about his disappearance, but just that he went back to his abode. But later on, much later on actually, in the 11th canto, we're going to hear in detail about the actual disappearance of Lord Krishna. So anyway, those are the qualifications: being faithful and being inquisitive, to hear. And Vidura was such a suitable candidate. Right, okay, so that was the first section. Now, here we go on to the second section, which is from verse 5 to verse 15. Diti asks Kasyapa for a child at an improper time. Of course, they are properly married. So therefore, Diti, as the bona fide wife, you could say, she has the right to ask from her husband that, please, I would like to have a child, so please let us conceive a child. And the husband basically must do that, although there are considerations in this case particularly of time. So, okay, from verse 5 to verse 15, let us read through the verses themselves first. The great sage Maitreya said, O warrior, the inquiry made by you is just befitting a devotee, because it concerns the incarnation of the personality of Godhead. He is the source of liberation from the chain of birth and death for all those who are otherwise destined to die. Verse 6. By hearing these topics from the sage Narada, the son of King Uttanapad, Dhruva, was enlightened regarding the personality of Godhead, and he ascended to the abode of the Lord, placing his feet over the head of death. Verse 7. The history of the fight between the Lord as a boar and the demon Hiranyaksha was heard by me in a year long ago, as it was described by the foremost of the demigods, Brahma, when he was questioned by the other demigods. Verse 8. Diti, daughter of Daksha, being afflicted with sex desire, begged her husband Kasyapa, the son of Marichi, to have intercourse with her in the evening in order to beget a child. Verse 9. The sun was setting, and the sage was sitting in trance after offering oblations to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, whose tongue is the sacrificial fire. Verse 10. In that place, the beautiful Diti expressed her desire. O learned one, Cupid is taking his arrows and distressing me forcibly, as a mad elephant troubles a banana tree. 11. Therefore, you should be kind towards me by showing me complete mercy. I desire to have sons, and I am much distressed by seeing the opulence of my co-wives. By performing this act, you will become happy. Verse 12, a woman is honored in the world by the benediction of her husband, and a husband like you will become famous by having children, because you are meant for the expansion of living entities. Verse 13, in days long ago, our father, the most opulent Daksha, who was affectionate to his daughters, asked each of us separately whom we would prefer to select as our husband. 14. Our well-wishing father, Daksha, after knowing our intentions, handed over 13 of his daughters unto you, and since then we have all been faithful. 15. O lotus-eyed one, kindly bless me by fulfilling my desire. When someone in distress approaches a great person, his pleas should never go in vain. All right, devotees, so let's go back. And verse 5, well, the section 2, verse 5 to verse 15, Diti asks Kashyapa for a child at an improper time. Verse 5, the great sage Maitreya said, O warrior, the inquiry made by you is just befitting a devotee, because it concerns the incarnation of the personality of Godhead. He is the source of liberation from the chain of birth and death for all those who are otherwise destined to die. Yes, so Prabhupada gives a purport here, and it's interesting, actually. Maitreya addresses Vidura as warrior because he's a Kuru. Vidura was not famous for being a warrior, really. He's born in that family, but his father is Vyas. Vyas is not a warrior. His mother was a servant girl. So he's not like a classic, he's not from classic warrior stock, but still he's a Kuru and they're a Kshatriya family. So therefore Maitreya addresses Vidura as a warrior because he's a Kuru, but also because he wants to hear warrior-type activities of the Lord, chivalrous activities of the Lord as Varaha and then as Nrsimha, Lord Nrsimhadev. Because obviously these two children who are going to come, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, they're going to in due course be killed by Varaha and then Lord Nrsimhadev. So Prabhupada makes the point that these topics are ideal for devotees. They're just perfect for devotees because they concern the Supreme Lord, and devotees have no interest in hearing anything mundane. There are many topics of mundane war, but the devotees are not interested. But the topics of warfare of the Lord, they're not really just concerned with death and killing, but they're concerned with the war against Maya. Yes, the war against birth and death. Ultimately, that's the significance of the topics of warfare of the Lord. So therefore, when we hear such topics, it's not just that we get into some fighting mood or, some mood of hearing about battles and all that sort of stuff, although that's there. But the result of hearing these topics is we become free from birth and death, relieved from the chains of birth and death. So Prabhupada then makes an interesting point. Foolish people are suspicious about Krishna and his participation in the battle of Kurukshetra. But they don't understand that his taking part in that battle was ensuring liberation for everyone who was present on the battlefield, basically. And Prabhupada notes that Bhishma said that everyone who is present on the battlefield attained their original spiritual positions after death. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, therefore, hearing the war topics of the Lord is as good as any other devotional service, like hearing about the rasa dancing, pastimes with the gopis, pastimes with the cowherd boys. The war topics of the Lord are as good as any other topics or any other type of devotional service. So on we go to verse 6. And Maitreya continues, by hearing these topics from the sage Narada, the son of King Uttanapad, Dhruva, was enlightened regarding the personality of Godhead, and he ascended to the abode of the Lord, placing his feet over the head of death. Prabhupada points out that when Dhruva Maharaj left his body, then he was met in Vaikuntha by people like Sunanda, who's an associate of the Lord, and others who are associates of the Lord. And they received him in the kingdom of God. And it's an interesting point. Dhruva left this world at an early age, as a young boy. I mean, not just a little boy like when he went to the forest. Prabhupada says here that he left this world at an early age as a young boy, although he had attained the throne of his father and had several children of his own. So, this use of the term boy, it was one of the first things I noted about Prabhupada's way of speaking English, that he referred to his disciples as girls and boys. But all of them, generally the great majority, were in their 20s. And when I heard this, people who are in their 20s, they're girls or boys, I thought, gosh, that's unusual. So here, Prabhupada said that Dhruva left this world as a young boy at an early age, but he had already been ruling, and he already had given birth to, fathered several children of his own. So, it's said, I've heard it said at least, that males are called boys and females are called girls until they're 40 years of age. So therefore, Dhruva, he had several children of his own. He must have been well into his 30s, or something along those lines. But then he left this world. He passed away, even though, he's relatively young to leave his body. So he was due to leave this world. Death, Prabhupada says, death was waiting for him, but he didn't care for death. And, well, the verse says he placed his feet over the head of death. When we read about what the specific incident in more detail, then the way it's described there is that death, the personality of death, was standing in between him and the ship, the Vaikuntha airplane, trying to sort of block him. But Dhruva stepped up and stepped onto the head of death, and then so used the head of death as a stepping stone to then step up higher onto the Vaikuntha airplane. Yeah. So therefore, and Prabhupada says it's interesting, he didn't care for death, however, and even with his present body, he boarded a spiritual airplane and went directly to the planet of Vishnu, directly to Vaikuntha, because of his association with Narada, who had preached to him initially in the forest. And it may well be later on Narada came and met him when he was ruling. It's quite possible. Okay. Verse 7. The history of the fight between the Lord as a boar and the demon Hiranyaksha was heard by me. This is Maitreya. So this was heard by me in a year long ago, as it was described by the foremost of the demigods, Brahma, when he was questioned by the other demigods. So there's no purport to verse 7. We go on to verse 8. Diti. So now it's back to this whole incident of Diti appealing to Kasyapa in the evening. Yeah. Diti, daughter of Daksha, being afflicted with sex desire, begged her husband Kasyapa, the son of Marichi, to have intercourse with her in the evening in order to beget a child. So, there's two interesting and I think important points here. First is that her desire was mixed, it appears. On one hand, she just had sex desire. On the other hand, she wanted a child. So it wasn't just one, it wasn't just the other. But the way it's presented first is, first of all, it was sex desire, and then it was a desire to have a child. Right. But it's the evening, and the evening is the wrong time, as we'll find out as we go on. Right, so, verse 9. The sun was setting, and the sage was sitting in trance, after offering oblations to the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, whose tongue is the sacrificial fire. Right, so there's a short purport here. The fire, well, as the verse mentions, the fire, not just any fire, but when a fire sacrifice is being done, the fire is the tongue of the Supreme Lord Vishnu. And the grains and ghee are offered to it, to the fire, means to the tongue of Vishnu, means that Lord Vishnu then accepts the grains and the ghee. And that, Prabhupada explains, that is the principle of all sacrifices. And Lord Vishnu is the master of all sacrifices. Prabhupada concludes the short purport by saying, in other words, the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu includes the satisfaction of all demigods and other living beings. Okay, and then verse 10. In that place, the beautiful deity expressed her desire. O learned one, Cupid is taking his arrows and distressing me forcibly, as a mad elephant troubles a banana tree. Right, yeah, so she's just losing or lost control of herself. So, right, purport. So Diti sees her husband is in trance. I mean, he's deeply absorbed spiritually. He has performed a fire sacrifice nicely for the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu. And now he's gone into meditation following the sacrifice. And he's in trance, he's in some form of samadhi there. So, Diti, I mean, it's really pretty bold of her, you could say, or you could say really quite improper. She began to speak loudly, not attempting to attract him by bodily expressions, but by loud words. And she frankly said that her body was distressed, agitated by sex desire because of his presence. He's a male, and he is her husband. So his presence is agitating her strongly, and she says, just like a banana tree is troubled by a mad elephant. You know, a mad elephant may shake the banana palm, may shake it strongly, can actually pull it right out too. Yeah. So then Prabhupada goes on that it wasn't normal for her to agitate him when he's in trance, but she was so much feeling sex desire, she couldn't control it. And so it just sort of came pouring out of her, regardless of the situation of her husband. And Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, her sex desire was like a mad elephant, and therefore it was the prime duty of her husband to give her all protection by fulfilling her desire. Yes, that's true, of course. He's the husband. She's the legitimate wife. Yes, there's truth in that. But not at that time. Not at that time. Verse 11. Therefore, this is Diti continuing, therefore you should be kind towards me by showing me complete mercy. I desire to have sons, and I'm much distressed by seeing the opulence of my co-wives. Means they have children, they have sons already. She's like the odd one out the only one who doesn't have a son. So she's feeling distressed by seeing that her co-wives, who are her sisters, they already have children, but she doesn't. So she continues, by performing this act, you will become happy. Well, that's true. Doing it as one of his important household duties, yes, but not at that time. So Srila Prabhupada gives a short purport, and Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that sexual intercourse for begetting children is accepted as righteous, or even as a form of himself. You can't get more righteous than the Lord. Krishna says, kamosmi, kam, that desire, that lust even. Kamosmi, that lust for having children under religious, proper religious circumstances. It is a form, kamosmi, it is a form of me, Krishna says. However, of course, if it's simply for sense gratification, then it's unrighteous. So, and Prabhupada makes the point that Diti's appealing to a husband for sex, but it wasn't simply, he made the point, it wasn't just for sex, for the sake of sex, but she actually wanted children. Yes. She desired a son or sons. And since she didn't have, but her co-wives did, she felt poorer than her co-wives. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, therefore Kasyapa was supposed to satisfy his bona fide wife. And it's true, but not at that time. All right, so Diti continues, verse 12. A woman is honored in the world by the benediction of her husband. Means when a woman, a good, faithful wife who has a good, faithful husband, when the woman has a child by her bona fide husband, then her respectability as a lady is increased than simply being a married woman. But when she's a married woman with a child from her husband, then her respectability, she becomes more worthy of honor and appreciation than a wife who has not had a child. So a woman is honored in the world by the benediction of her husband. Benediction means being given a child. And a husband like you will become famous by having children, because you are meant for the expansion of living entities. I mean, she's intelligent. She knows that you are meant to be a Prajapati. You are meant, it's your duty to increase the universal population. So therefore, you should do that with me. And when you do that, you'll be doing your duty. And when you do your duty nicely, you become respectable. You'll become famous by having children. Yes, but not like these two children, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. Actually, he would become infamous. Right, so there's short purport here that Prabhupada refers to Rishabhadev, 5th canto, one shouldn't become a parent unless one is confident that the children he begets, he will be able to deliver them from birth and death. Yes. And human life, Prabhupada says, human life is the only way to get out of birth and death. The human form of life is the only possibility, really, to get out of the material world, which is so full of misery, birth, death, old age, disease, main problems, but many others also. So, therefore, every human being should be given the opportunity to take advantage, if they have the human form of life, then they should have the opportunity to take advantage of the human form and go back to Godhead. And, Prabhupada makes the point, a father like Kashyapa should beget good children for the purpose of liberation. His own liberation by doing his duty, and the liberation of the children by bringing them up nicely in Krishna consciousness. Right. Verse 13. In days long ago, our father, the most opulent Daksha, who was affectionate to his daughters, asked each of us separately whom we would prefer to select as our husband. So Prabhupada gives short purport, but interesting. It appears from this verse that free selection of a husband was allowed by the father, but not by free association. The daughter would naturally, being in a social environment, everyone's in a social environment, there's all sorts of people coming and going. So the daughter would naturally see from time to time the young men of her sort of age group who could be candidates. So therefore it was possible for a daughter, particularly of the higher classes like the Kshatriyas, it was possible for her to choose in her mind someone she felt she would like to have as a husband, but then not go and hang out with him and go out and go to the parties and, all of that. And not by free association, but she would tell her parents that such and such young man seems nice. And then the parents, particularly the father, might then approach the parents of that young man. So the daughters then, not always, but sometimes, were asked separately to submit their selection of a husband who was famous for his acts and personality. But the ultimate selection depended on the choice of the father. Yeah. So verse 14, and it's Diti continuing, our well-wishing father Daksha, after knowing our intentions, handed over 13 of his daughters unto you, and since then we have all been faithful. That's very nice. Faithfulness is such an important quality for anyone in Krishna consciousness. But in this sort of context of a married situation, faithfulness of the wife to the husband and the husband to the wife, This is such an important qualification, essential. So, Prabhupada continues the discussion about daughters possibly selecting potential husbands. And Prabhupada says generally the daughters were too shy to express their opinions before their father, but they would pass the word around through someone else. Prabhupada says, maybe like a grandmother, who the daughters would have very free access to, and the grandmother would always be very sympathetic to the granddaughters. So anyway, Daksha then collected the opinions of his daughters, and it seems that as it happened, 13 of them felt Kashyapa was the right young man for them. So Prabhupada makes the point that every one of Diti's sisters was a mother already. All of them. The only one of the 13 who was not a mother yet was Diti. So, since she was equally faithful as the others, why should she remain childless? That's what she's saying, that it's not fair. So, right, verse 15. O lotus-eyed one, kindly bless me by fulfilling my desire. When someone in distress approaches a great person, his pleas should never go in vain. So, and Prabhupada makes it's a very important point, very interesting point, that Diti understands it's the wrong time. She already understands. And therefore she understands that her husband, who is very religious and very, morally upstanding, very righteous, pious gentleman, that he may feel, no, not at this time. We can't do it at this time. So she knew she might be rejected, or the request might be rejected, but she's making a plea that it's an emergency. So the time, the situation, these things should be overlooked, which, anyway, she's pushing her luck. She really is pushing her luck. In other words, she knows it's not right. And she probably knows the children that may come, if we actually do this, the children who may come, there may be something wrong with them. But too bad, she feels, I need this now. So now we've still got another 5, 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Let's go on to the third section, verse 16 to 32, and just read the verses. The section's titled, Kashyapa agrees to conceive a child with Diti despite the inauspicious time. Verse 16. O hero, Vidura, Diti, being thus afflicted by the contamination of lust, and therefore poor and talkative, was pacified by the son of Marichi in suitable words. 17. This is now Kashyapa. O afflicted one, I shall forthwith gratify whatever desire is dear to you, for who else but you is the source of the 3 perfections of liberation? So of course the wife helps the husband very much. But we can see Kasyapa's just getting carried away. He should have just said, okay, that's fine, but let's just wait till the morning, an auspicious time. Verse 18, and Kasyapa continues, as one can cross over the ocean with sea-going vessels, one can cross the dangerous situation of the material ocean by living with a wife. 19. O respectful one, a wife is so helpful that she is called the better half of a man's body because of her sharing in all auspicious activities. A man can move without anxiety, entrusting all responsibilities to his wife. 20. As a fort commander very easily conquers invading plunderers, by taking shelter of a wife, one can conquer the senses, which are unconquerable in the other social orders. You can see he's getting carried away. He's really flattering her. 21. O Queen of the home, we're not able to act like you, nor could we repay you for what you have done, even if we worked for our entire life or even after death. To repay you is not possible, even for those who are admirers of personal qualities. 22. Even though it is not possible to repay you, I shall satisfy your sex desire immediately for the sake of begetting children. But you must wait for only a few seconds, so that others may not reproach me. Yes. Anyway, okay. Few seconds, he says. Should be a bit more than a few seconds, but a few seconds is something as opposed to nothing. Verse 23. This particular time is most inauspicious, because at this time the horrible-looking ghosts and constant companions of the Lord of the ghosts are visible. 24. Lord Shiva, the king of the ghosts, sitting on the back of his bull carrier, travels at this time, accompanied by ghosts who follow him for their welfare. 25. Lord Shiva's body is reddish, and he is unstained, but he is covered with ashes. His hair is dusty from the whirlwind dust of the burning crematorium. He is the younger brother of your husband, and he sees with his 3 eyes. 26. Lord Shiva regards no one as his relative, yet there is no one who is not connected with him. He does not regard anyone as very favorable or abominable. We respectfully worship the remnants of his foodstuff, and we vow to accept what is rejected by him. 27. Although no one in the material world is equal to or greater than Lord Shiva, and although his unimpeachable character is followed by great souls to dismantle the mass of nescience, he nevertheless remains as if a devil to give salvation to all devotees of the Lord. 28. Unfortunate, foolish persons, not knowing that he is engaged in his own self, laugh at him. Such foolish persons engage in maintaining the body, which is eatable by dogs, so they engage in maintaining the body with dresses, ornaments, garlands, and ointments. 29. Demigods like Brahma also follow the religious rites observed by him. He is the controller of the material energy, which causes the creation of the material world. He is great, and therefore his devilish characteristics are simply imitation. Verse 30, Maitreya said, Deity, so in other words, Kashyapa is really trying to say, hang on, please let us just wait. It's all right. I will fulfill your desire, but let's just wait a little. Maitreya said, Deity was thus informed by her husband, but she was pressed by Cupid for sexual satisfaction. She caught hold of the clothing of the great Brahmin sage, just like a shameless public prostitute. 31. Understanding his wife's purpose, he was obliged to perform the forbidden act, and thus after offering his obeisances unto worshipable fate, he lay with her in a secluded place. In other words, they conceived a child, or actually two children together at that inauspicious time. And 32, last verse in this section, thereafter the Brahmin took his bath in the water and controlled his speech by practicing trance, meditating on the eternal effulgence, and chanting the holy Gayatri hymns within his mouth. So there we go, devotees. We will go back through that section with the purports tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.